executive branch, doing the bidding of the branch. And even the court was called out during that famous State of the Nation speech. So we have a very authoritarian executive power at the moment. And that ruling is going on with a kind of a grudge. It is not a joyous one. It's not one that says, wow, what a country we have, we're going to make it even better. It's one that says, pretty much this country, blah, blah, blah. I won't use words I'd like to use, words that are not allowed on this television station. But it's one that disparages the country to a great degree and doesn't see a lot of optimism, but rather sees pessimism everywhere that it looks. And besides this socialistic, communistic trend that is gaining momentum and is being fought against at the same time, there's also a curious approach to Muslim countries and Muslim interests or Muslim phenomena. For example, the Fort Hood situation, which when it happened, I described to you how blithely the president spoke about it after joking, even as he found out, he was in front of an audience, even as he found out about the massacre. And then how he refused to let the Congress investigate, and now how he's refused to give to the committees in Congress who have oversight over such matters, refused to give the intelligence reports on how this ever could happen. And I guess lately the Congress has subpoenaed that this information be given to them. So these are curious things. The president, there are many things we could talk about in regards to this. The president also has a plan to give space technology to Muslim countries from the United States. I could go on and on. Again, there's a long list of giving examples of what I'm talking about, so long that I never have time to tell you in one short session. But myself, along with a lot of other people, and you know I was saying this early on, and so many things that I've brought out in my lectures came well before it was so much spoken about on cable or internet areas of our country. Finally catching on and doing more research. I was I don't want to take any credit for that, but I was kind of surprised that I was finding so many things that just didn't seem to be being spoken about. And anyway, it looks very much like we're on a fast path to destruction. And this is mainly, certainly destruction of the way of life that we know it now, and destruction of us because the money that we have spent, not overall, not for the past 20 years, that's true too, but money that happened since January of 2009 that never had to be spent. We weren't broke before 2009. Now we are broke. And the press in many countries besides our own is talking about the grave situation in the United States and the fact that probably it will not be able to retain the standing that it does. They don't see anything we're doing as a way out of our decline. And you know that it's costing an awful lot of money to live. And things are getting, anybody who can stand here or watch here and say to me their life is getting better because of how we're proceeding since George Bush, through the vacuum of the years of George Bush, the vacuousness through those years, which I complained about bitterly too, but now it's even more important because the intensity of and the nature of how we're disrupting and causing woe, what we still have got to see result for us as the months and years go by, is so much more compounded now. And that's why people are suddenly so alert as well, too, because you remember, first George Bush got his first term, and many people were dismayed, as was I, and yet he remained popular enough to get a second term. Okay, so he was still popular enough to get a second term. And it was only in that second term that virtually people from both sides of the aisle started to say, no, we cannot continue with this. And then you remember, so they were waiting. They were waiting for a new term, a new president, a new regime. Then you remember toward the very end of George Bush's term, Mr. Hank Paulson of previously of Goldman Sachs, did go to the Congress and demand all this bailout money for the wealthy fat cats, very wealthy fat cats. And of course he managed to get it very rapidly. And at first he presented merely a page that says, give it to us now. I'm paraphrasing. Of course the language was more technical. Don't put any supervision or oversight of what we're going to use it for, and just do it. And nothing. I don't even think there was anything in there about a payback. So when this happened, people became up in arms. That's when the other side of what we are now calling a quiet revolution, trying to take over our country, the other side that cared about America being the constitutionally republic and semi-democratic kind of country and government that it was, were up in arms, and they were flooding Washington. Don't do this bailout. They were freaked out, to put it bluntly. And then they see in January, not only do we continue to give enormous sums, this happened in the fall, right before 2009. And so then they're figuring maybe there's hope. What's the new term going to do? Now we're in the emergency situation where people are already saying, hold it, don't you dare go there, don't take a step further with the money, stop it right now. And of course, not only did Congress and the government not hear us, but they intensified the money and the programs and the benefits and the guarantees. It is so sick now that these very aggregated wealth interests are able to, they were able to sell worthless securities, these so-called CDOs and so forth, of packagings of people's loans that never were going to be able to pay it back. They were able to sell all this so-called junk that was causing the system to freeze up to our Federal Reserve, and in conjunction with the Treasury be involved in this and so forth. And then they got money for it back. And then when the government then needed money from them because they needed loans, and that's how things work with the Federal Reserve, they borrow from these banks they do business with, and then they return the money, and vice versa. There's always money going back and forth this way. So now that the banks get the money for really horrible stuff, then the Federal Reserve has turned around and borrowed that money and paid the banks even some interest while they're borrowing that same money that they gave them to begin with. So this is how absurd the whole thing is. And many, many people, contrary to the popular opinion of what you will hear in the press, many learned people, people in these markets, people with financial backgrounds will say, no way should these bailouts have occurred. I know the popular mythology that people swallow hook, line, and sinker is we had to do it otherwise. Yes, you know, who would have lost in this situation? Which banks would have gone down and who would have lost? The aggregated, extraordinarily condensed and concentrated wealth of persons that deal with these banks, not the ordinary citizens. So it's been a terrible time. And similarly, General Motors, which was taken over by the government and given big amounts of money, even now, that it still owes, similarly could have failed on its own. But what happened is it was made into a situation where the union was given much more power. Bondholders were thrown out. Car dealers, who were private business people in this country, were told to hit the road by an autocratic government, an autocratic executive power that runs rings